everybody. Welcome back to the Virtual Summit. I am your host, Mary Vallarta. And as you know, we are here to talk about healing your chronic illness and taking your life back. Basically, how to balance your mind, body, and spirit to restore your health and vitality. So today I have Dr. Bruce Hoffman, and I am super excited to chat with him. Before I tell you or get into the questions, actually, let me tell you a bit about who he is. Dr. Hoffman is board certified in anti-aging medicine, has a master's degree in clinical nutrition, and is a certified functional medicine practitioner. In addition to his clinical training, Dr. Hoffman has studied with many of the leading mind, body, and spiritual healers of our times, including Deepak Chopra, Osho, Ramesh Balsekar, and John Kabat-Zinn. He has shared the stage with Deepak Chopra, Dr. John F. DeMartini, and he continues to spread his inspiring vision of healing and wellness with audiences and patients around the world. Once ensconced in the practice of family medicine, he quickly realized that his interests in medicine were broader than just drugs and surgery. The allopathic medical practice was limited to treating symptoms and illnesses, but failed short in restoring the patient's health entirely. So Dr. Hoffman embarked on a journey to understand what constitutes the human experience and what the triggers and mediators are that perpetuate human suffering. He wanted to assist his patients not only to be free of disease, but to realize their maximum potential. Dr. Hoffman, welcome. That is quite a resume you have
Yeah, hello. Nice to be here, and I'm looking forward to this conversation, seeing what we can come up with.
there. Me too. I've been looking forward to this conversation, so I'm super energized to be speaking with you. So let's get into it. Dr. Hoffman, I love how you've combined the strengths of Western medicine with the mindful and spirit-centered approach of Eastern medicine. But as your bio states, you actually didn't start out this way. You were practicing family medicine. So what pushed you to go into the path of functional and integrative medicine that takes mind, body, and spirit into account?
Well, it was quite a the path leading to where I am now is quite interesting in that when I was a young boy in my teenage years, I went to boarding school and I had a teacher there, and my teacher was very interested in not only Western psychology, particularly the work of Carl Jung, but also very interested in Eastern mythology and Eastern religions, particularly the work of a subset of Vedantic Hindu medicine called Advaita. And Advaita takes the point of view that there is no there out there, that everything springs from one source. So there's just like this one mind, one consciousness, and there is no separation. It's a very specific way of looking at reality. And many of the quantum physicists who came onto the scene at the turn of the century had a very similar point of view. When they dissolved matter into light, they said all light is continuous, there's no separation. So this ancient theological concept was being married with Western, physics.
Mm-hmm.
And my teacher, Roger, I just hung out with him and we explored all these things. And so I became very interested. And when I was in about 15 years of age, I had what they call a Satori experience, whereby you actually directly experience this one mind, one reality. You actually, it descends upon you and you just know that to be true.
Mm-hmm.
But before too long, you descend back into your dualistic past, present, and future, gain and loss reality, and it's lost. But I still remember that. And then I had a second experience like that in my 30s. So having had two experiences of one mind, one reality, it sort of cemented in my body-based understanding of that was behind all systems of appearance. Nonetheless, I went to, I continued my high school education. My mother applied for me to go to med school. I had no idea. I found myself in med school. I wanted to be a poet, to go hang out with all the beat poets in San Francisco, but my mother thought I should have a more formal education. So she applied for med school. I found myself in med school. And actually, after 6 years of medical training, I became a family physician and actually fell in love with it. I actually loved what I did and ended up in Saskatchewan, Canada, practicing family medicine. But when I got to Canada practicing family medicine, it was very apparent that that system of medicine is very limited in terms of what you can offer. We
Hmm.
call it the N squared D squared system of medicine: name of disease, name of drug, and that's about it.
Right.
But what happened was then I also came across a video by Larry Dossey, one of the great thinkers of the last 50 years in the field of integrative medicine. And I watched Larry Dossey sort of draw out this long sort of explanation as to how he combined East and West into his medical practice and his thought process. And that triggered another huge, like just an explosion of interest, and reignited all of my childhood experiences with my high school teacher in Advaita and psychology. And all of a sudden, this whole roadmap just opened up, and I thought, this is a very interesting possibility. So I then just started learning as much as I could about the human experience, and I just became a student of as much as I could possibly absorb across all spectrums of human reality, from toxicology to
Hmm.
illumination. And I just started to develop a roadmap, and with different teachers and different experiences and different ways of seeing and being exposed to different systems of information. Like I did an Ayurvedic training, and they talk about different bodies, different systems of the body. And I spent time with a very well-known a doctor from Germany who lives in Seattle called Dr. Dietrich Klinghardt. Spent years studying with Deepak Chopra and David Simon, et
Mm.
cetera, et cetera. And then I just started to develop a roadmap for looking at the human condition all the way from traditional medicine,
Yeah.
then expanding a bit to functional medicine, and then moving to the brain, and then to the emotions, then to the mental field, then to the soul, and then to the spirit, which is beyond all confines to space-time.
Hmm.
And so I developed this roadmap of, experiences at each level, diagnosis at each level, potential treatments at each level. Because many people will want to go to an acupuncturist, which is at level 3 in this energy model, but they really should be seeing an oncologist. Or they'll go to oncologist where they really should be doing trauma work. So I
Okay.
try to sort out all these different possibilities across all layers and levels, and help teach, write a new curriculum really for doctors or healers, not really doctors, because doctors, MDs, should keep doing what they do. They do it well,
Yes.
and they shouldn't. There's this whole, every patient that sits in front of me says, "Well, why doesn't my doctor know this?" Because it wasn't his interest, and he didn't train to know this. So give it up. You just don't even ask the question. Don't waste your time. We need a new curriculum for a new expansive model.
Right.
And that's been my life calling, my life passion, and to which I'm still a student. I mean, I study more now than I did when I was young. I
It,
just keep
it doesn't.
expanding the infinite knowledge base. Yeah. Yeah.
Hmm. And I think that's what makes your work so fascinating to me. It's because you have sort of like a 360 view, since you've been in, you know, that MD side, the family medicine side, and then you're now continuing to learn more about the Eastern methodologies. So you're kind of taking everything and putting it all together to make these roadmaps that you're talking about, which sounds so.
It's not just Eastern, Mary. It's all systems of knowledge. From phenomenology to
Okay.
theology to psychology, to East to West to up and down. It's all layers, all levels. It's not only Eastern
Oh,
insights. Some of it is Eastern, but it's not only Eastern insights. Yeah.
I see. Interesting.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, integrating all that together is very fascinating, and it gives you more of a well-rounded perspective. And as you mentioned, MDs aren't trained to have
Mm,
that type of approach, and that's why there's
mm,
a time and place where that's going to be appropriate. And then there's
Yeah.
also another time and place where something else will be more appropriate for a
Yeah.
patient. So I think that's
Yeah.
important to note. Um, there's a lot more research coming to light on the important role that food plays on one's ability to prevent disease and sometimes also reverse or heal. But as you pointed out, there are such things called trauma, right? You'll recommend people see some trauma specialists or stress. So, what are your thoughts on having more emphasis or focus on things like, mindset, changing internal narratives, and healing emotional trauma when it comes to healing?
The One of the great challenges of working with patients is when they present with complex multi-system illness, which is the only kind of patient I see these days, they still very much in that diagnostic mindset of what do I have, and it's usually singular. What one thing do I have? Mold or Lyme or Marcel or whatever, and then they start to think diagnostically and therapeutically in an allopathic way.
Hmm.
But when you start to have a broad spectrum of understanding human condition, and you start to understand all the antecedents, mediators, and triggers that eventually end up in biology and pathology, disease, you can't you can't stop yourself taking a far more comprehensive history.
Hmm.
So, the healer of the future can commit both acts of commission as well as acts of omission. It's not what he knows, but it's also what he doesn't know. So
Okay.
if you're sitting in front of a patient and they're presenting with their symptomatology at this moment in space-time, it behooves you to ask every single possible trigger that may have led up to that presentation. And it's, our Western understanding and consensual reality is that diseases kind of fall out of the sky. It's like, oh, I've got rheumatoid arthritis, you
Yes,
know.
yes.
And then you can go to the doctor and get an immune modulator, or you can go to a naturopath and get, a herb, but it's still that singular mindset. But
Hmm.
when we look at patients from a more complex model, we have to start looking at not only the diagnosis from a Western perspective, because you need to know that. You know that it's an inflammatory and immune system based disease based on autoimmunity, which has its links in leaky gut, et cetera, and a genetic predisposition. You got to know that. But you've also got to understand how people arrive at a point in time with a diagnosis. People, they inherit epigenetically the traumas of their forefathers. So
Right.
if you don't ask the history of their forefathers and their ancestors, you're missing out on a piece.
Yes, yes.
And then they get born into a family system. And whether or not they were adequately seen by their mothers in the first 10 years and by their fathers in the second 10 years and peers and by their loved ones in the third decade, they don't adequately myelinate the three different brains that grow up, the reptilian, limbic, and adult brains. So if they're not self-regulated by external parental figures,
Mm-hmm.
they don't learn to self-regulate themselves, and they have a fragile personality structure very often.
So how do you
All
help
they
your patients uncover all of this information?
You've got to take a very thorough history. I take a 2.5 to 3 hour history.
Mm-hmm.
Ask all these questions. And then those experiences, your epigenetic transfer of ancestral trauma, early childhood experiences, that all gets then translated into your perception of reality, your internal dialogue, your thoughts,
Yeah.
your value systems, your beliefs, and your defenses.
Right.
And so many people stay highly defended from feelings that arose in the first 30 years of life because they're too painful.
Yes.
So they're defended and they're traumatized. And that then translates into electrical messengers in the brain, which you can read on a QEEG. I have a brain treatment center which reads QEEGs, and you can see hallmarks of early trauma on the brain. You'll see the one brainwave, the beta brainwave, highly read, highly amplified.
Mm.
That then gets turned into chemical signals that then start to interact with your phospholipid cell membranes, which you can measure, which then turn on receptors, which then turn on genes, which then turn on proteins, which then turn on all the biochemistry that runs your life.
Mm-hmm.
So you have this whole cascade of possible antecedents that can set you up for what's happening in this moment with a so-called symptomatology or disease expression, but it's not just rheumatoid arthritis.
Right.
It's way back in the ancestry, trickling all the way down to physiology. And then you have the environment
Right.
coming in that's playing havoc with your, your detox pathways and sitting as DNA adducts, sitting as adducts on your DNA and mitochondria, affecting their expression of lipids and proteins. So
Hmm.
if you don't ask all these questions, you've got a limited roadmap and you've got a couple of tools in your toolbox.
Right.
You got to have a very broad toolbox. And that's why education becomes important. We have to educate healthcare providers of the future to broaden their toolbox, but not only to broaden their toolbox, but also to broaden their self-understanding as well. Because if a healer approaches a patient with a hero type approach, I'm all knowing and you're all sick, they're
Hmm.
also perpetuating a very lopsided point of view. The patient's well side doesn't get activated. They don't activate the healthy part of who they are. They identify with the disease. The doctor's the hero is going to fix them. And that's a very lopsided relationship. And often patients sort of, in order to survive that lopsidedness, they just don't activate the intent to do what it required
Yeah.
from them to kind of activate the healer within, the healing archetype within, which is without activating that, there's no outcome.
Right. So would you say your approach is also about giving power back to the patient, letting them realize that they have a big role to play in their healing?
But try to, because some people are highly defended
Hmm.
against, they say they have, see, people have value systems,
Hmm.
they have a hierarchy of values, and people will say that their health is a high value.
Right.
And they come to you to treat their health or help them treat their health. But when you start to take a history, you'll find out, particularly with men, by the way, this is like a big
Hmm.
male thing. Their highest value is really their career making money. Their health is secondary. They often delegate their health to their loved ones, their spouses or somebody else. They don't really want to rob Peter, their career making money, to pay Paul to invest in their health. So they don't raise health up as a value.
Mm.
Unless patients are prepared to raise health up as a value and become a participant in their own healing experience, they remain passive. And they have what we call projection of will. They project their will to heal onto you. And
Oh,
if you rise up in the healing archetype, I'm all knowing, I'm going to fix you, and you start working harder than the patient, it's a very lopsided relationship, almost doomed to fail.
right.
So you've got to try and enter into their system and get sort of feel where they are in their own evolution. Is health a high value? How healthy is their ego strength? Is it fragile? How much projection of will do they have? Do they have outer resources to assist them, or are they without resources? Do
Hmm.
they have, personality disorders? Do they have what it takes to take on such an extensive journey? And of course, finances, because most of this isn't funded by healthcare systems, and nor should it be, because it would bankrupt most of them. I mean, it's
Hmm. Right. And also, one of the most important questions for them to know the answer to is why do they want to heal? Why do they want to get better?
that's
What
one of
are
the
they fighting
questions
for?
in the first page of my 70-page questionnaire. Why are you here? How can we help you? What is it you
Hmm.
want to achieve? And how committed are you to making the changes necessary?
Yeah,
And it's
exactly.
interesting when it comes back 50%, 75. Immediately I'm like,
Ooh,
we have to have this conversation first and find out what that's about.
right.
Because if people haven't been seen by their parents, if they haven't been supported and challenged in a healthy, supportive, challenging way, which is how love evolves and how you develop a concept of self. You only develop a good concept of self and good ego strength if you're both supported and challenged by your parents, not just supported.
Mm,
If they don't have a healthy sense of self, they can't take on what is being required of them to sort of move through this experience. They just don't have the resources to do so.
right. That's
Yeah.
very true.
You have to find out where they are with that, and where is health in their value system.
Yeah.
You really have to ask that question before you launch into tell me about your disease. You have to find out who this person is sitting in front of you and where they're at in their hierarchy of values as to doing what it takes to get better. Or, some people have, there's many possibilities to healing. Like the first possibility is just treat a disease, get the symptom out of me.
Mm-hmm,
I
mm-hmm.
want it. Do it quickly without money and without me being involved. And give me one pill.
Right.
Mahatma Gandhi said the tragedy of modern medicine is it works, it takes you. There's that possibility. Then the other possibility is they see symptoms as teleological, that symptoms are actually asking them to enter into their own life to try and find out why they are this way in space-time.
Mm-hmm.
And then they see mind-body connections, that the way that they construct reality may influence, and the systems they got in place to support them, and the way they perceive things and what they eat, it plays a role. So they become more conscious of their own advocacy. That's
Right.
the second possibility. But the third possibility for healing are those people who not only want to be free of disease, which is sometimes not possible. You've always got some symptomatology, but live at their highest sort of maximum potential.
Yes.
And in order to do that, they have to go through a lot of personal development and personal growth to know their value systems, to know how inspired they are, to find a workout. Do they know what wakes them up every morning? Are
Mm-hmm.
they called from above by some, spiritual purpose? Or are they just get out of bed and just sort of see what happens?
Right. So that brings us back to the why. And let's talk more about this maximum potential, because I know that's a big part of your work. Can you
Yeah.
describe what maximum potential is?
Well, when a person wakes up in the morning inspired by what they do, that's living at your maximum potential. They're living at their maximum potential, which it's a visionary, it's a vision of what they are here to do on this planet while they're in a body. And
Right.
they answer to that. In psychology, it was called a daemonic calling, Daemon.
Mm,
Your inner constellated self calls you from above to become who you're meant to be.
I
And
see.
so you're just inspired to do what you do, and you know what you're meant to do, and you throw all your life force into that outcome.
Which is basically their higher purpose.
Their
That's
highest value, their
mm-hmm.
highest purpose, their highest value. Some
Mm-hmm.
people, they don't need to be motivated to get out of bed. They
Mm-hmm.
they get out of bed and just do what they do, and
So,
they stay up very late at night trying to manifest it, and it's their life force is invested in it.
right.
You- there's that old image which I love is if you go to our university and you stand outside and you look at the different levels of a university, the undergraduate students' lights go out at 4 o'clock. The postgraduates go out at 6 o'clock. The doctoral students at 10 o'clock, and the Nobel Prize, their light gets switched off at 1 o'clock in the morning.
Oh my
They just called into the daemonic calling. They just know who they are and what they're meant to do.
Mm-hmm. And that's what pushes them. Yes. So how
But
do you
that's only the third possibility. The fourth possibility of
oh,
healing.
okay.
The fourth possibility of healing is when you know that you are part of a connected whole, and you don't identify with your body, your emotions, your mind. You identify with your part of that aspect of you, which is beyond all of that, which is your deepest self, your soul, which is it's sort of linked to this one mind, this eternal consciousness. You're not your body, you're not your mind, you're not your thoughts, but you're part of this continuous oneness, and you stay connected to that, in that field, the field of consciousness that is that. And then you just, I've had patients die fully healed, connected to that aspect of themselves.
Hmm.
One, they just know who they are, and they know they are not their bodies, they're not their minds, they're not their thoughts, they're not their actions, they're beyond that. Yeah.
That reminds me of the concept of sattva from Ayurveda, which you've said.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
That's right.
It really is.
Or Brahmi, it's called Brahmi too in the Vedantic model. Yeah.
Oh, nice. I'm just getting into more Vedic studies. I'm in Ayurveda right now, which I'm really loving. And that's really what inspired my own healing journey.
I
Um,
took my model from Ayurveda because I studied it for years and went to India and did a Did an internship there. So
That's my dream. I want to
yeah.
go to India and study it too one day.
But they have these koshas, these bodies in humanity. They talk about these koshas, these bodies. And I took that model and added a few. I made the 7 stages to health and transformation model based on Ayurvedic Vedantic scriptures.
Oh, got it. So, what are those 7 stages? Can you share them with us?
Yeah, spirit, soul, mind, emotion, energy, physiology and structure, environment.
Okay,
Yeah,
interesting.
yeah. And they're based on the 5 koshas from Vedantic philosophy. The
Very.
5 bodies, the 5 layers, yeah.
So, obviously, when your patients are working with you, I can only imagine some of them get challenged, right? Some of them might get frustrated during this whole process. So, how do you go about helping them and supporting them push through or be comfortable with feeling this discomfort? Because a lot of times people run away from discomfort.
So again, it's incumbent upon me, if I'm doing a reasonable job, not to impose my model on them, but just ask what they want.
Okay, going back to that.
And some people just want to not have asthma. And they're interested in 7 levels of healing. And then I respect that.
Okay.
Then I do pull out all my functional medicine toxicology tricks and just treat asthma, treat triggers of asthma, mold and food sensitivities and mast cell blockade and mitochondrial resuscitation. I do all my functional medicine things.
I
But
see.
other people come to me and say, I've been sick my whole life. And then they give you 50 symptoms. And you know immediately that that person has probably not had the most advantageous experience from either ancestrally or from birth. Almost definitely you
Mhm.
can tell that because of the adverse childhood experiences studies which showed that people who've had adverse childhood experiences have 3 to 4 times increased health disadvantages as they mature. So
Mm.
when people they tell you I've been sick as long as I remember, you immediately go into early childhood trauma history, and it's always there, always there.
Hmm.
You can
Like,
always tell. They have interrupted bonds with their mothers. They have um, merging with mothers. They have, they sent off to boarding schools at young ages. They go to intensive care units and incubators.
yeah.
And mother and has problems with father. So mother takes her eyes off the child and doesn't myelinate the child's sense of self. And mother's offline. And then they have stillbirths and miscarriages and
A lot.
they're all there in the history almost every time in a complex illness patient.
Mm.
Yeah.
So basically, you meet them where they're at. You
You
respect.
attempt to meet them where they're at, yeah, and
Yeah.
you try and work out, at level 1 what's going on. Is it food, gut, mold?
Right.
You
Right.
work, you do your normal medicine.
Got it.
Then you ask deeper questions. Are some of these symptoms teleological? Are these symptoms bringing patients to you because they have to heal a part of themselves that they never integrated in their evolution? Like,
Mhm.
for instance, I had a patient with MS whose father was a very famous sports coach, and she never felt seen by her father, always neglected, and she had a super ego that was highly punitive, and she always felt she didn't feel ever seen, and so she was constantly beating herself up and striving to become more than she could possibly be. And then she tried and tried and tried, but dad was always coaching the team.
Mhm.
And then the dad got, when she was in 18 or 19, I believe, her father got fired from the team. And the next day, she developed MS. The next day. And so if that symptom's not teleological, because that symptom's saying, Dad, you were never there to take care of me. Now look at me. I'm sick. And he rose to the occasion. When he was fired, he was at home and he could be with his daughter. So she almost as if it was set up that way, that the symptoms drew that complexity together in order for it to be resolved. And when she got that and saw that, she used that in her healing. And it was very powerful. And I have many, many case histories like that, where symptoms guide people to heal a part of themselves they've left behind.
Right.
Yeah.
That is fascinating. So
Symptoms don't fall out of the sky. They have intent, in my experience.
yeah, I think that the more I speak to all of the experts that have talked to so far, the more I'm realizing that symptoms are really an opportunity for people to get to know themselves deeper.
Absolutely.
It's
Absolutely.
yeah.
I did a workshop with Mark Wolin, who's one of the great family systems, family constellation authors and workshop leaders out there. Once a year, we'll do a workshop on illness and your family system and early developmental trauma.
Mhm.
And almost to the person, we can link the rising of symptoms to events in the lifespan that needed to be resolved and healed. And
Mm.
then once we linked them and made them conscious and gave them the homework to do, there was a vast new release of a healing potential. Because you don't heal until you have a new internal dialogue, a
Right.
new story, a new narrative. If you
Yes.
have the old narrative, you create the same biochemistry. But people with a new narrative, they have a new insight. It releases a potent internal life force that then constellates the biochemical pathways downstream to advocate healing. So we would do this workshop. Mark was a master at it. You do family constellations where patients would sit next to him, you ask, what's your problem? And they'd say, thyroiditis or leaky gut or mast cell mold, whatever.
Mhm.
And then he'd say, well, tell me about your mother, tell me about your father, tell me about your grandparents and your siblings. And then he'd put up people in this constellation and then work with them energetically as to what was going on in their system and how their symptoms correlated with the dynamics of the system, the entanglements of the system.
Mm.
And they could see how their symptoms they just didn't arise from nowhere. They were contingent upon some of these entanglements that needed to be healed. And once they saw what they hadn't perceived before, because children will often tell themselves a story that's not true.
Oh yeah.
They'll tell their mother was mean and angry, but their mother was constant. Mother lost two children before they were born. The mother got very little from her mother. The mother was always bothered about the father who was out doing something or other. So the
Yeah.
mother just had a little bit to give. And unless the child sees that and sees the mother through new eyes, the judgment of the mother is because a person's half their mother, half their father. If they
Mhm.
start judging half of themselves, guess what? They're not open to the healing force, which is their whole self.
Mm.
So
That
everybody ultimately has to realign with their parental mothers and fathers. If you don't say yes to your mother and father, your healing is going to be limited, no
right.
matter what you've experienced.
Because it's pushing yourself away. They're half of you, like you mentioned.
And that's a setup for autoimmunity, by the way.
Oh, yes, because you're rejecting yourself in autoimmune, right?
Exactly.
Oh
Exactly.
my God, that is powerful. I that's wow. I don't even know what to say right now. But um it's just it shows how important it is to really understand yourself, but also understand your parents. And then also understanding your grandparents, because your grandparents affected your parents' psyche. It affected how your parents treated you.
No question.
Yeah.
100%. There's a one-to-one correlation.
So, Dr. Hoffman, switching gears here a little bit, because I'm also quite interested in anti-aging medicine, but I don't know too much about it. Can you tell us a little bit about what that is?
It's a myth. I'm trained in it, but it. There's no anti-aging medicine. All
Right.
there, yeah. So it's a nice sort of slogan for slowing down the process of aging.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah. So we most of us age. We just kind of you've got the hormones of youth, and you've got these
Yeah.
drives to the first 30 years you can do no wrong. You just push yourself through everything, and then then you get entropy sets in, and you start to sort of come apart slowly but surely.
You're noticing it now.
Oh yeah, no question. And the wrinkles and the skin sags and then
The
you get
little
the
back pain.
inflammatory diseases of aging, and then you get separated into either you're going to get heart disease or
Right.
cancer or heaven, one of those things. But
Yeah.
they're all driven by genetics and environment and lifestyle and mind body. the more inflamed you are by your lifestyle, the more unresolved you are with multiple triggers, the more interleukin-6 and tumor necrosis factor and all the inflammatory signalings are flying around, destroying your mitochondria, which then reduce your ATP, which then reduce your life force. So
Mm,
what we do in anti-aging medicine is try and slow down the trajectory
I see.
before
So,
all is lost.
yeah, there's no way that you can stop yourself from aging. It's just really about how to stop those symptoms of aging, I guess. Not stop, but delay, right?
Try and modify it so that your entropy isn't like this.
Right.
It's like then you drop
Slow.
then you drop dead one day because your gene pools run out. It's time.
Yeah. It reminds me of my grandmother. She died, but she didn't really die of any disease or illness. I think it was just because she was older and her body's just tired.
The genes give out.
Yeah.
That's everything ends.
Yeah. So share some of the most important things you've learned from your spiritual teachers. You've named a lot of big names in your bio, like Deepak Chopra and Osho.
Yeah. So here's an answer you probably won't. It's not. It's yeah.
Give us the
So
real answer, not what
yeah.
I.
So people who've had difficult upbringings, who've had some complexity in their early developmental years, will often go to find spiritual teachers to take the part of the good parent that they feel they didn't get.
Mm,
So whenever I have patients come in who have spiritual teachers and gurus, I'm very suspicious. Having had very many spiritual teachers and gurus myself, and having been to India 3 times and sat on many mountaintops, meditating. So that's the first insight which I really want to emphasize. It's not wrong. It's just when people don't heal with their individual mothers and fathers, they'll find the great mother and father that
mm,
will look upon them benignly.
got it.
And you'll find a lot of the great spiritual teachers who went to Burma and Thailand and India in the 70s, all the Western students of spirituality. There's a lot of them. John Kabat-Zinn being one of them, Jack Kornfield being another. They all went and meditated for 15, 20 years, put on red robes, and then came out of the forests, went back into New York, into cities of America, started to see people, and all of a sudden realized, hold on a second, we just performing spiritual bypass. These people have got messed up lives. And they all went and became psychologists. They
Mm,
all needed to heal the early traumas that people were trying to bypass to develop, spiritual awakening.
right,
So
right.
that's one of the greatest insights I've seen over the years. It's not that spiritual teachers can't provide some insight, but I always get a little uneasy when I see a guru sitting on a big white, you
I
know,
do too.
and then he's got all these devotees, and I've done that for decades. So I'm judging myself. And then I just always ask, what is it about this experience that is being bypassed? What is it? What are they trying to gain? And what layer and level is still unfulfilled in their evolution? And
Mm,
that's what my curiosity is, because you can't really an awakening experience into Satori is a sort of a brief explosion where you go beyond mind, body, and you actually know that everything is unified. There is no past, present, future. There's nothing to fear. And you're sort of eternal, immortal, and you're never born and you never die. That is what happens when you awaken.
mm-hmm,
But
mm-hmm.
to sit in front of a guru to try and get that experience, I'm not sure that's the best use of your time.
Yeah, I think it's just an illustration of how you're still searching for answers outside of you.
And
When,
that's what Advaita says. The essence of Advaita, which I learned at 15, was the very act of seeking prevents you from being who you are,
right,
because you are that. So what are you seeking? You're already
what are you
that.
seeking? Exactly. Go internal. I get that. That's really good advice when you think about it. Like the answers are not out there. They're in here. And
We've
it's
got to, so Carl Jung said the urge to be whole is evolution. You can't avoid it. You're trying to, and then other people, Diane Connolly said, all healing all sickness is homesickness. You're trying to come home to
Mm,
your most integrated aspect of who you are.
right.
And you can't just go and sit with a guru. It's not, it's,
That won't give you the answers. Yeah.
it's fun and it's very pleasant, for a time. And I've done it for a long time. But you still got to go down the chakras and work your way through them. You've still got to
Yeah.
early developmental trauma, all of that
Yeah.
stuff. You got to heal that stuff.
If anything, that's sort of a way where someone could just still keep resisting looking at themselves, getting to know themselves by sitting with a guru and not ever advancing to internal examination.
Perfect, perfect example you just gave. It really does, in many cases, exemplify and exaggerate the very pathology that's brought them to the guru in the first place, which is
Mm,
resistance and projection. They by sitting in front of the guru, they're refusing to face the very thing that they need to face, which is themselves and their defenses.
yes.
Yeah,
Fascinating.
yeah.
Um, so aside from sitting or seeing your patients one-on-one, Dr. Hoffman, you also actually have programs, online programs and courses that people can take. Can you tell us a bit about what those are?
Well, I used to. It's funny. I used to do weekend workshops and all sorts of things. Then I condensed it all into a Friday afternoon lecture, a 1 hour lecture for my new patients. Then the 1 hour lecture became 7 hours over 3. Then I felt sorry for my patients. So then I took that lecture and made it into a book. So that book and those videos are available.
Nice.
Yeah. So if you want to learn 7 levels or 7 stages to health and transformation, I have a video and I have a PowerPoint explanation of it all. But I
Ama-
no longer lecture to that degree. I'm going back and starting to do lectures on different topics like Alzheimer's disease and mast cell activation and mold exposure
Mhm.
and various aspects of mind-body healing. But those are in development. And most of the time now, I'm helping other practitioners guide them through this new curriculum of 7 stages to health and transformation, where not only do they learn new skills, but they learn about themselves. They have to stay congruent with they have to be present in that experience. And I forgot to mention part of my explanation, I went off at a tangent, that patients who don't have good relationships with their parents have low trust. And
Mm,
if they've had medical PTSD, trauma from the medical system, that gets projected on you as a healer because all medical systems are very patriarchal and you're a parental figure. So
mhm,
if you're sitting in front of a patient and there's no trust established, there's nothing you can do.
mm.
So you have to ask that question first. I'm trying to teach people, other practitioners, how to be present with patients before they get more tools in their toolbox and go and do courses and learn things.
That is so important.
Yeah. How to develop trust with a patient. And
Yes.
sometimes you can't, they're too traumatized and you try your best, but it's just not possible.
But that just shows the role that each person plays, the role that the practitioner plays, and also the role that the patient plays. If
Huge.
either of them aren't invested, it's not going to yield the highest potential outcome.
It won't. And
Mhm.
some people are too traumatized with too much mental health illness that they just can't do what it takes to show up in that experience. And then you just have to admit that it's not going to work out.
Right.
And you want to learn, you want to learn you just got to learn who's sitting in front of you. You also got to know yourself through your own Myers-Briggs typology, through your own Ayurvedic typology. You got to know if you
Wow.
Vata Pitta Kapha. Is that patient Vata Pitta Kapha? Because a Vata patient is not going to do what a Kapha patient does.
No.
They're a wholly different person.
Yeah. And then honoring and accepting that type of person and not projecting another type of person in
Yeah.
that chair.
Like if I'm a Pitta practitioner in my hero archetype, I know everything. I'm going to tell you what to do. And a Vata patient walks in who's very sort of inspired for like 3 days, and
Yeah.
and then they lose interest. If you just if you impose your value system and your Ayurvedic typology, your dosha onto them, and you don't resonate and know how to treat a Vata patient, you will lose them and you'll feel frustrated.
Right.
Like
That's
a kappa patient, they always show up. They never do what you ask them to do, or they do very little, but they're always very loyal.
very loyal.
Yeah, they're
And,
very loyal.
and we're talking about kapha, vata, pitta. Those are the different dosha constitutions,
Yeah,
right? That we talk about in Ayurveda.
that's right. And then a pitta patient, if you're not the best in the city, they'll leave you and go and find the best. So
They
they,
look for the facts. They're like the fact finders.
you don't sharpen up and have the best office and be on time.
You got to
They
check
go.
all the boxes for the pitta patients. Well,
But,
Dr. Hoffman,
but as a patient, as a practitioner, you got to know who's coming in the door because you got to
right,
adjust your own way you interact with them. And
right.
your Myers-Briggs typology too. Thinking people are not the same as feeling people. You got to know that stuff.
That's very true. It's sort of like detective work that you kind of have to do when you work with your patients. Well, Dr. Hoffman, I can talk to you for hours. There's, obviously so many different questions that I can keep asking you. But for the sake of this particular interview, I'd like to ask if there's anything else, if there's one thing that you can leave us with here today that you didn't get a chance to cover.
I think what's most important is that people they have to understand that if they present with chronic ill health or chronic complex illness, they have to try and find a practitioner who has a broad range of experience with multiple tools in their toolbox. They
Mhm.
can't just do one stool test and hope to heal. That's number one. Number two, they have to become their own patient advocates. If they're not invested in advocacy, there's very little you can do. Number three, they can't project all the will to heal on the practitioner. They have to take some of that responsibility themselves. Number four, they have to raise health up as a value. If the health isn't one of the first or second values, it will default to number 4 or 5. Wherever you have your highest value, you'll have your most order. Wherever you have your lowest value, you'll have your most chaos. If health truly isn't your highest value, be honest with yourself and then look at it and say, in the future, I will make it my higher value. But right now, I want to keep working and eating poorly and making money because that's where my highest value is. Not wrong or right. Just be honest and truthful. So know your value system.
Right.
Yeah.
Wow. That is a great way to end the discussion. I feel
Yeah.
like it was you beautifully summarized our conversation and added new thought to it. So I appreciate that. Um, I will go ahead and make sure that I link Dr. Hoffman's website where some of his writings and programs are, so you all can take a look, and I'll also include that in the post-summit email. Dr. Hoffman, you're also on social media. So what is your handle where people can, find you and possibly connect with you there?
So Instagram, my staff said, make sure you say this at the end. Instagram is www.instagram.com/Dr. Bruce Hoffman /.
Got it. We'll put that in.
Facebook is www.facebook.com/the Hoffman Center for Integrative Medicine /. And then the website's hoffmancenter.com. And I have a brain treatment center, which is braintreatmentcenterofalberta.com. Are those all the handles that one has? I mean, yeah, I think
Yeah, I mean, there's more. Do you have a TikTok? Do you have a Twitter? I'm just
I
kidding.
have, yeah, yeah. I only, yesterday, my Twitter account was activated by my assistant. I had no clue.
There you go. Well, Dr. Hoffman is on Instagram, so you can catch him there. I think that everyone's on Instagram anyway.
I'm on Instagram, yeah.
Yeah, so find him on IG. You should see the handles below. You'll see that. And get at Dr. Hoffman. Look at his website. There's a lot of resources there where you can get started if you are interested in everything that we've talked about. And just, like Dr. Hoffman said, be truthful to yourself and meet yourself where you are, right? Stop resisting and meet yourself where you are, because that is an integral part of starting and continuing the healing journey. So,
A- and also the outer aspects of healing, often in complex illness, have to be congruent with inner healing too. You can't just take a potion or a herb. It's much more complex than that. You've got to take a full system approach. And there is a lecture being posted on my website soon or on YouTube where I give a 1.5 hour lecture on the 7 stages of healing, summarized with some of the things we mentioned.
ooh, yes, I'm gonna watch that for sure. Okay, you all, thank you so much for joining us today. Hope you got a lot out of this. Dr. Hoffman, you are amazing. Thank you for speaking with me and
Yeah,
for
nice
sharing
talking to you.
knowledge.
Yeah, thanks, Mary. Okay.